Hello and welcome back to Logical Magic Examining Esoterica. Hey guys, we have the much anticipated tea leaf reading episode that I had teased a while back. My guest is Rissa Miller. Among other things, she is a tea leaf reader, but she's also a storyteller. She's somebody who really believes in the power of plants as well. One of the things that really drew me to her bio was the concept of valuing the idea of storytelling. One of the things that we have found in our society is that people are more open to change when something is brought to them through a fictional construct. It is something where we drop our guard, we don't feel attacked. And the easiest example of that goes all the way back to, I believe it's the 80s. It might be the very early 90s, but I think it's the 80s, late 80s, where Tom Hanks was in the movie Philadelphia. And it was during the height of the AIDS crisis before any meaningful treatment had been developed. And people were terrified of people with HIV. Seeing a very famous comedian portray somebody suffering so deeply from HIV, from AIDS, made people reach out to him empathetically because he was already so liked. And it was an incredibly brave thing to do because it could have stigmatized him, but instead it opened people's heart and awareness to the idea that people who were afflicted with HIV were not terrible human beings, they were simply suffering ones, and that they didn't pose a danger to us and that we should extend our compassion to them. So that is the most direct example I have of the power of storytelling within our society, within our universe. It's part of the reason that art remains one of the most important things we can do as a society. And moving over to divination arts, Rissa is able to do something that I don't know a great deal about, which is tea leaf reading. I know about scrying, I know about rune casting. Clearly, I read, tarot cards and runes, and I can do object-based readings as well. But I have never actually done any form of tea leaf reading, and it absolutely fascinates me. Before we get to Rissa today, let's talk a little bit about what is the housekeeping segment, because I have to do the housekeeping at the top of it. If you need to find me, I'm at therisingmoon.com. You can book me for a tarot card reading or a life coaching session. My YouTube channel is Cronecast at the Rising Moon. I have a Patreon where there's Monday through Friday daily advice on how to heal and some angel messages and a couple of other things. And now we're going to go over to Rissa to get her stuff and start talking about today's topic. Rissa, hello, how are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me. Finally, it had to align. It had to be the right time.
Yeah, exactly right. Rissa actually lost her voice to viral laryngitis. So that is why I'm saying the much anticipated. We had to reschedule on that because it's difficult to do an interview when you cannot speak. Rissa, tell me a little bit about what your preferred forms of storytelling are.
Wow. So, I didn't realize it immediately, but I've always been a storyteller in one way or another. I have studied and performed dance. I have been a writer, a photographer. One of my degrees is in photojournalism, which is visual storytelling. And I've worked in newspapers and magazines. I've been a writer, editor, copy designer. I have done all kinds of work, and essentially they all boil down to the same thing. It's about storytelling. And I worked as a food editor for a while too. And I feel like food also tells a story. It could tell the story of a group, it could tell the story of a community, it could tell the story historically of a place. And all of these things come back to, the example you gave was amazing, but I think storytelling has been with us literally since people communicated. It is how we teach our young people who we are. It is how we have identity. It is how we have culture. It is definitely a big part of, it's a component, I should say, of what the folklore aspects of history are, and that kind of links together to build history.
And of course, all religions are creating a narrative around a faith structure, frequently to
Absolutely.
try and control people, but it does start out as a narrative. I think the easiest example of ancient storytelling to help instruct people would be Aesop's fables, which things,
That's a great example. It's a great
right?
example.
It's like when we're trying to figure out, it's like, what do you mean by this? Aesop's fables is the easiest one because almost every child has exposure to the Aesop fables that taught us about essentially energy management, who we are in this world, who we wish to be, and the examples of like the don't, it's almost like the don't do this manual in some instances, but it was highly instructive. And that stories are not just about escapism. They're about accessing parts of ourselves that are connected to the imagination, which connects us to our basically our third eye, to other dimensions, to escaping this 3D reality. And from that other reality, we can receive guidance, we can receive messages about how to grow, we can receive healing. And one of the doorways to that is through storytelling. So again, you've had a varied career, and that's always important to remember, is that we rarely reach the final version of ourselves, that you will likely have different seasons as you learn more about yourself, as you harness your gifts. So you've been harnessing a lot of gifts as well. One of the things that was very intriguing to me is you have a deep and like abiding relationship to plants. How
I
that's
do. I do. Well, and tea leaf reading definitely falls into that category. So, a little bit of my personal story. I'm a third generation tarot reader. It has been part of my family for a very long time. And you could say I became a tea leaf reader to be a rebel. When I was 16, my mom gave me my first loose tea. And it came with one of those metal tea balls, which used to be really junky. Sometimes they still are kind of junky. Um, it fell apart the very first time I used it. And the tea
the
was listed in the
infusers,
cup.
yeah, the
Yeah.
infusers, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how they haven't figured out a better way to make those. But all of that said, the tea fell out loose into the cup, and it was really precious to me. Back when I was 16, 30 something years ago, loose tea was rare. We didn't have it everywhere like we do now. So I was like, dang it, I'm going to drink it anyway. And so the tea leaf started sticking to the inside of the cup. And I immediately said to my mom, well, that looks like a cat and that looks like a basket. And she said, that's a kind of divination. Maybe you should just flow with it and see what comes up for you. So I started keeping a notebook, and I indeed learned to read tea leaves in that way. I taught myself. But, I always had that relationship with plants. My mom had an herb garden. I grew up growing food. I grew up growing lots of plants, making tea from lemon balm in the yard. And, I eventually did go on to study formal herbalism. I don't treat patients. It's honestly just for my own knowing. I guess I do treat my friends when they ask, but I don't have a formal practice with like an office. That said, I still went through the training just because I wanted to, just because it was knowledge that I really wanted to have and understand from a clinical viewpoint, as well as the energetic viewpoint on all of the plants. And I really do believe that for most things, not everything, from like you have a broken arm, you need a doctor. But for most things, there are plants that can answer to the situation. They can speak to your emotional state. They can speak to your physical healing. And it isn't always the most obvious. Like most people will give you a cup of peppermint tea for a tummy ache. But if you have acid reflux, that's not the best choice. So, there was just a lot to learn and a lot of information I really wanted to have available to me in my own life. So I finished the clinical herbalism training for that reason. Mostly, I wanted a even deeper relationship with my plants.
One of the things that you touched upon was that you learned something simply for your own enjoyment because it wasn't going to have a necessarily professional application in your life. That is one of the tools when you're trying to expand your own connection, when you're trying to expand your own gifts, when you're trying to like, hey, how can I tap into my own intuition, is learn something new. It expands your mind. And whenever you're expanding your mind and your knowledge base, you are breaking free of the barriers that are set in place by being within a cycle. It is one of the easiest ways to break a cycle, is to begin learning something new. And to remember that growth almost always lies outside of your comfort zone. So if a part of you is like, this is challenging for me, that is perfect. It is perfect. Try to challenge yourself if you are seeking out more, if you are seeking out growth, if you are seeking out the development of gifts that are currently beyond your ken. Challenge yourself with something. Go towards learning herbology, go towards learning botany, go towards learning a new language. That is one of the easiest ways to continue expanding into more and more. And what have you found with having this diverse ability to connect to different types of living things? How has it aided your divination?
So, as far as divination, I guess I see symbolism more and differently. So my symbol language is completely my own. It has been informed by other study. So, when I went through art history in college, I learned symbolism from art. When I went through literature, I learned symbolism from literature. When I studied different societies and cultures, I would incorporate those symbols too. But, of course, my plants do talk to me, and I talk to them all the time. But that said, each thing I've learned is kind of like what you're talking about. I sort of look back over my life as like brick after brick after brick, and each one is leading me towards where I'm supposed to go and the things I'm supposed to do. It doesn't always make sense at the time. There are times when I'm like, I don't know why I'm taking this class that's completely outside of my realm of normal, but here I am signing up and taking it. Uh, but everything makes sense down the road. And there have been times where I was like, I don't know why I've just suddenly decided to learn video editing, but here we are in a world where video editing is really relevant. And I'm really glad that I took those classes when I had time, even though at that moment I had no idea why I wanted to learn it.
Quite frequently, our growth lies in the things that we're a little bit resistant to as well. And a lot of things that I find with people who have grown up before, like everybody walked around with a smartphone, everybody constantly had access to like Google Maps and things, is that like they can be a little bit resistant to new technology. And just try. One of the things that you have to accept when you try new things is that you may not be great at it. And if you value yourself only by being able to be good at things, then there's always going to be something outside of your wheelhouse. So maybe value yourself on the idea that you are trying to expand your knowledge base and your abilities, and that not everything has to be perfect and not everything has to come easily for it to be worthwhile within your life. I frequently struggle with technology because of a form of CPTSD that I have, where I can get very, like, I used to get beaten for making mistakes. And so whenever there's the idea that I could make a mistake, I can feel that rising up in me. And the way that I finally started dealing with it was to accept that it's like, well, I'm learning something new today. It's going to suck, but it won't be forever. And I'll only set it for 90 minutes, and that I will have trouble processing information because of that old trauma. And I may have to reread things 4 or 5 times, but that's okay. And learning to work with the things that you are reluctant to go towards is one of the ways to heal old damage. And it becomes part of a maintenance program you have for self. So I'm saying this because people feel stuck a lot. And whenever you're stuck, going towards something that challenges you, that is new for you, it's important to be interested in something. Like I could start the study of reptiles, and I don't have a great affinity for reptiles, but it's the effort of trying to invite something new that, again, wears down the blockages, releases the fragmented energy, and helps us go towards something new. If you want new things to happen, do something new. It's just kind of that simple.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Let's talk a little bit about something that you said, where you have your personal relationship to symbolism, because that is something that everybody developing their arts needs to understand, is that you can receive a lexicon of base knowledge, but when it comes to intuitive arts, you will actually begin to get things that are beyond that lexicon, beyond that kind of like, this was defined for me, this was defined for me, this was defined for me. Like my easiest example is the Knight of Swords in reverse turned out to mean murder for me a lot of times. And do I read a lot of like, no, it's been present in client readings sometimes where someone has lost someone to a violent crime. And that meaning developed over time. And to allow yourself to have those things where maybe everybody else has a very positive reaction to something like the Magician card, but if it has to do with you, it's like, yeah, no, actually in reverse, that means a manipulator for me. And
right.
Developing that, start out with the base knowledge and understand that is the foundation that you are pouring for the art that you will develop, that will be very personal, because these are very personal arts. So can we talk a little bit about tea leaf reading and how you developed your relationship? As you said, like, that looks like a cat to me. In tarot, as you're a tarot reader as well, that often means a connection to a magical realm or intuition or luck or a chance as well. So what does it mean for you?
In my teacups, it's about home.
Oh, wow. That's completely different. Awesome.
And so, like I said, I was trained in tarot, not on the Smith weight deck. I was trained on a much older version of the deck called the Tarot de Marseille.
Yeah.
And there were no,
Yeah.
the faces were not the same. It was just pip cards, and the major arcana was there, but not as ornate as Pamela Coleman Smith made it. So the symbolism I know from tarot is different. Also, I was trained in a tradition that was more like Roma, and that was my grandparents, and it's totally different. So, I have to admit to you, I went through a phase where I thought as a tarot reader, I was less than because I wasn't trained on this deck. I didn't have this as my base. I was like, oh, I'm not as good because I wasn't trained on the Smith deck. I learned some other way. I don't have the book that everybody talks about where all the answers to the tarot lie, allegedly. I mean, we both know that's not true. And I came around over time to saying like, okay, so I bring something totally different to my reading. I bring a legacy, and not all tarot readers have that. Not all tarot readers have my background. And the right messages are still going to come through because I know how to trust and listen to my intuition because I have a separate practice of reading tea leaves. And it became something where I simply had to learn self-trust. Now, when it comes to my symbols, I had a system that I used to teach myself, and I can show you how that works in a reading.
Okay, so there's an audio version, there's a video version, and I'm going to have to describe what, because like my listeners are on the audio version. So Rissa, what are you holding up?
I'm holding up drawings that I do of my teacups. So every single time I do a reading, I do a pen and ink of the cup. And this artwork is always the clearance to keep, but I draw exactly what I see in the cup, and each person's drawings are completely different and unique. So usually a cat is something to do with home in one of my readings, and I read its posture, its body language as part of that story. But sometimes a cat can literally be the cat they live with, or a cat they're thinking about adopting, or it can be a doorway to a mystical portal, depending on what else is in the cup. So as you can see, these two cups were very different. One of the drawings I'm holding up is a lot more sparse, and the other is really packed and dense. And these are from the same tea bag. It just comes out differently for each person. Each reading is literally one of a kind. There's never exactly a repeat. And it really becomes important to trust the ability to read symbols and intuit their meanings and the stories that each group of the cup is telling.
One of the things, I'm going to circle back a little bit to the idea that you were trained on the Tarot de Marseille, and that like it does have a different, like I did a tarot episode with Jacob, guys. If you want to check out the history of tarot, we delved into a cursory look at it because it's a very old divination art, and Madame Lenormand is going to get involved in there as well. But there is divination art outside of the idea of the Waite Smith or the Thoth Tarot, and that to remember that if you're dealing with your ability to see personally, expect to develop a personal connection. I'm entirely self-taught. So I didn't study anybody but my cards and figuring out like what they meant to me. And that is as valid a way as somebody who goes and takes tarot from somebody who's been teaching tarot. Remember, it's a personal art form, and that what Rissa is talking about, where she developed a connection that was very personal to her, is exactly what you're looking for to open the door to your third eye. When I'm trying to tell people how clairvoyance begins to manifest for people, you don't often see like detailed visions of what will happen to another person. As a, for instance, when it first comes online, something from your memory will, a vision from your memory, an image from your memory will rise up, and you'll have to make the connection of what did that mean to me then? What did that depict to me then? And that is your intuition trying to connect you to the reading in front of you. So you have to be very open to the idea that it's not a textbook thing. It's not like following a recipe. It's learning the basic techniques and tools and the basic meanings that will be ever expanding and connect you to that particular and unique individual, sometimes yourself and sometimes other. But to be open to the idea that this does not mean that to me, it has a different connotation, has a different meaning, that's valid. That's valid. There is no one way to do this. It is a personal art form. And the pictures that you held up are fascinating to me. So can you just remotely, or are those people that you see in person?
Both. actually.
Okay.
So I had only ever done it in person until 2020. And then I sat down and I was like, how can I make this work? Because I was getting more requests than ever, as people were facing this extremely uncertain time. They were scared. They really wanted to be able to tune in. I developed a system. It took me some trial and error where people could send me pictures of a teacup they turned themselves. I put a video on my YouTube channel of like how to turn your cup, how to take the pictures, and then I was able to do it remotely there going forward. And in fact, today, most of my clients are still remote. People are busy. They don't always have time to meet up. And I actually have clients all over the world, Australia, Europe, Asia, and it has been the easiest way for people to meet up. I have people in the same town I live in meet me remotely just because it's more convenient. So,
And there's actually some like actual physical science that would help people understand why sometimes reading remotely is actually a more targeted and a clearer form of reading. When we meet with somebody in person, we all walk through this world with our defense mechanisms and our shields. We try to protect ourselves as we interact with people. Whenever I see people in person, and I'm like you, most of my clients are international and across the country at this point. I have local clients as well, but I prefer to read remotely because you do not have to use any of your energy to overcome somebody's natural. I am in a room with somebody, and so my shields go up. We all do that, our personal bubble. You don't have to use any of your energy to overcome the defensiveness that we have to have in place to move through this world safely. When you're meeting with somebody remotely, their guard is dropped more. They don't feel as easily pried into or threatened, or they're not as defensive, and their emotions, people allow their emotions to flow more freely as well, because there's this thing where they feel disconnected from judgment. And so you can get very, very, very clear answers remotely. And I really recommend that people consider that, because people have the supposition, and it's not correct, that somebody in person is going to do a more accurate job. And it is actually the opposite.
agree.
You're,
Agree.
you're less likely to start catering your answers to how somebody will be able to hear it, and so they get more information. It's this weird balance of energy when you're with somebody in person versus remotely, where there's more detachment from the 3D world, which is exactly
Absolutely.
what we're seeking when we're doing divination. Um,
I
so
want to add to that as a
sure.
tea leaf reader, when I'm looking at pictures, I have an extra tool at home to do my remote readings with. I call it Photoshop. And it means I could zoom in 400% on that tea and see details that I can't see in person because of wherever I'm reading, there's a time limit. If I'm in person with you, I have about 20 minutes to look at your cup. If I'm at home, I have more time than that to look at a cup. And I have this fabulous tool on my computer to zoom in and take a closer look. I can't do that if I'm, in a coffee shop or an art gallery and I have to like move on to the next person. Also, there's privacy in a remote reading. When you're reading in public, there's frequently like, I don't, what would you call them? People who gawk and want to watch and listen, and it's super uncomfortable sometimes to say things that are very private to the querent. Like, I don't necessarily want to share their business with everyone. So that's another thing I like about remote reading.
Yeah, you can actually be like touch upon more sensitive subjects more easily, because the person can be, particularly I do remote readings where it's literally I never meet with the client. They're literally called remote readings, but I do Zoom readings normally. And
Mhm.
it always surprises me. And they're for people like in China and Singapore and places that they may have spotty internet, and so it's just a little bit easier for them. And one of the things that I can always rely on is that like if they can listen to it over and over again, and then they
Yeah.
can also put themselves into a situation where they're actually able to receive the information more easily. Meaning that like, hey, if this is getting super personal and it's about your relationship and you're not sure where it's going, then you can put your headphones on, take a walk, and be with the
Yes.
information without feeling like that whole defensive bubble does not just exist between a reader and a client. It just exists with other people being present. So since it is an element that is beyond the earth, since it does connect to air, like please consider the idea idea that remote readings can give you tremendous clarity, even on something like tea leaf. And like I have always been fascinated by it because I know that the Roma also that some people in Eastern European countries were able to read someone's saliva. If somebody spit, they would be able to look at it and tell them things about their future, about their health, about their prospects, about the things that they were working on. And it is partially because you're connecting to a vital essence of somebody, which is a little bit the same thing with tea leaves as
A
far
little
as
bit.
I know. Is that correct?
It is, and that is a fascinating piece of history of divination you just pulled out of the basket. um, so one of the things I also teach is history of divination, and it does go back to literally the beginning of humanity, right? We've always faced uncertainty. We've always had questions. We've always wanted to know how to best manage risk in our world. And so all of these systems of divination were born basically heading in the same direction, right? So I think of tea leaf reading as a form of scrying.
Mhm.
And it is you're still looking at a surface. It's not a lake, it's not a crystal, it's not a piece of glass, but it is still a surface. It's porcelain. And you're reading well, mine are mostly porcelain. Yeah. Um, you are still looking at a surface and reading the symbols therein, right? So it's the same idea as any other scrying. And what I always tell people who want to learn or who are fascinated by tea leaf reading, if you develop a symbol language, you can apply it to anything. You can apply it to clouds. You can apply it to saliva. You can apply it to smoke. You can apply it to crystal. You can apply it anywhere that you could see symbols come through for you. You can apply it to your walks in nature. Anywhere at all, it will work the same way. You just have to take the time to learn your symbol language. And it usually is a little time consuming and it takes a lot of self-trust.
And patience,
It
patience.
does take patience. I
It
mean,
doesn't go from 0 to 60. It is something
no.
that comes online at the rate that you can. Another thing that you can do is that what I was talking about personal object readings is like if, as for instance, a lot of people from their family line will have jewelry that is inherited. Jewelry is usually worn on somebody and it really does absorb their personal energy. So if you want to try this out, what you might do is take your grandmother's wedding ring or whatever it is that you've inherited, a locket, and hold it within. I use my dominant hand because that is just it. That's in celestial and angelic magic. Your dominant hand is a very important tool. Put it in the dominant hand, cover it with your non-dominant hand, and sit with it. And just close your eyes, breathe in and out, and see where your thoughts go, because that is one of the ways that the door can start opening. See what images come to you, what sensations come to you, what emotions come to you, because it's great to have wonderful readers. And like I know some fantastic psychics, and obviously I've looked at your Instagram. You're very gifted, and you know that part already, but you're a very gifted psychic. But unfortunately, like we're not on demand all the time. So it is a good idea to try and open the channel within to be able to access your own guidance. And some of these things that we're talking about allows you to open the door to receive messages more. So again, whenever you're really stuck on something, if there is an artifact or an antique that you've inherited from somebody who was a trusted advisor, like I said, a grandmother or somebody you admire throughout history, something that they own, put it in your hand, cover it with your other one, sit with it, breathe in and out, and see what comes into your mind. And will it always be accurate? No, but it is a developing trade. It is a developing skill, and to have some patience with it. When did you start giving readings? You're from a family of tarot readers, so like apparently you grew up with it in your crib.
You know, I didn't start reading I started reading first for friends, for fun, and I grew up during the time in America known as the Satanic Panic.
Oh yeah.
And it definitely colored my feeling of security around doing public readings.
Yeah.
I literally I grew up in a community where that was a very real thing. There were alleged Satanists killing chickens in the county park. Probably not really, but looking backward, it definitely created this aura of fear
Mm.
around the entire practice. I remember being told, "This is fine at home. Don't tell anybody we do this. Don't mention it. Don't tell your friends. Don't tell their parents. Don't tell your teachers. You must never tell anyone." So it wasn't until I left and was in college that I started reading for friends, even for fun, because I was scared. I was scared I was going to be arrested as a Satanist, even though literally the tarot has nothing to do with Satanism.
No.
Nothing at all.
That's like literally nothing. Even the devil card is
No,
it has a relationship to pleasure or materialism. It can be about greed, jealousy, all kinds of relationships to person, places, or things that aren't serving you. But it's not actually the devil. It's not the
right.
like the idea of the darker forces necessarily. That was a really rough period that some people still have a tendency to associate divination with.
They
And
do.
I
Movies don't help though.
no, and like I want to like talk about the more sinister societal reasons that that might be true beyond the idea of like, hey, there was a murder that like grown men pained on at the Memphis Five, I think it was, or is it three? I no longer recall. They've been freed, thank God.
Yes.
They were blamed as that was part of the Satanic Panic, is that they were blamed for the murder of little boys. I think it was within Arkansas, but like again, I'm a little fuzzy on the details because I
I'm
was
fuzzy. What you're saying is familiar, but a lot of it also had to do with the emerging field of psychology as far as repressed memories.
yes.
And all of these folks suddenly had repressed memories of being abused by Satanists.
Yeah.
And, then we also learn later the power of suggestion is real.
Exactly. Unfortunately, and the other like implication that has been throughout history of like, witches being accused, because I'm one of those weird people who is descended from one of the Salem witches, Rebecca Nurse.
Wow.
She was hanged as a witch. By the way, they were hanged, they weren't burned.
Right.
It was hanged as a witch at the age of 72. The poor old lady like couldn't even hear half of the questions. But what really happens there is that in a patriarchal society, the absolute panic that comes in around the idea that women can access power that is not given to them through a male intermediary is part of what fuels that type of thing. So women have a tendency to be more drawn towards divination, partially because our bodies have a tendency to be in sync with the moon in a way that really fuels and opens intuition. Now, there are some great psychics who are men. I'm not talking about it being a field men can't get into, but to re-examine the reasons of control that they try and make people conform to these standards. And divination can be an incredible tool for examining the things that you are carrying in a subconscious way, the memories that you are carrying. And there was that period where the power of suggestion led people to have something called false memory syndrome. And
Yep.
it was a very, very, very difficult time. Like you, I started reading in college and I was just flat out terrible at first because all we cared about was whether or not it had to do with some dumb dude.
That sounds
Every
familiar.
single card was it's about that guy in my psych class. Like we did not have very elevated reasons for trying to connect. And that's
One of my decks was the Gypsy Witch card, which is really easy to use that deck for yes/no divination. And so many people were like, does so and so what like me? Like, are they gonna ask me out? I was like, oh my goodness. I look back now and I think that's actually pretty funny. However, I would say the majority of people who come to me for readings, one of the two main things they go after are relationships. Other one is money, whether that has to do with job or education is, splitting hairs, but it's about money, and relationships. The two
money,
main
power, and
things.
love. Money, power, and love.
Yeah.
And try to remember, like, for anybody who's, because you already know this, so you like you don't need me to tell it, but like the audience might not, is that if you use tarot as a tool to understand yourself, then everything comes into line because you will be the most empowered that you can be, and you will get the best outcomes that you can get. So whereas these, it's called predictive tarot, what we're talking about with money and relationships, predictive tarot can be great. It has its place. But self-empowerment tarot is one of the things that can help you look into your subconscious world to understand why you're repeating patterns, why you seem to
Yes.
have the same relationship over and over again, and how to break that pattern and start a new and a healthier one. So even though it does get used for that, it's like, please consider expanding the view for the audience of what you think divination arts can do, because they can provide you with a window into why you do the things that you do, because we all get in our own way sometimes. So moving past apparently you had the exact same college experience I did, where it's like some dumb dude, and like, why am I saying they were dumb dudes? Men are not dumb. I'm not slamming men. At the age of 18, 19, 20, the last thing they really cared about was whether or not the person in their psych class was their soulmate. And so it was not the most effective use of that, but it was the door that like we were all doing it. We were all asking about, guys. And then it developed into something more over the course of time. So past the like hiding the art thing, when did you come out of the tarot closet, Rissa?
Well, it definitely took a number of years for me to feel comfortable with that. You know, I did say I went into journalism and I wanted to be taken as a serious journalist. And serious journalists didn't also practice divination because you dealt in facts.
Mm.
So then for a number of years, I completely boxed up and put away my divination practice. And I didn't realize how much this took away from me personally until I lived through it. It took away a part of myself that had always been present. And there was a longing for it, but also this whole perceived not good enough thing as well. Like, this isn't good enough for me if I'm going to be a serious journalist. And I worked at some pretty large publications. You know, I was a national editor of a magazine. So it became a balance where at some point, I couldn't even tell you the exact date. I pulled out my grandma's tarot deck and I started pulling cards for myself again. And more, like you said, not so much the predictive tarot, but more like I need to get back on my path. I don't feel like myself. I feel lost. I mean, briefly, I was in the wrong marriage. Like, there were a lot of things that I had gone sideways on in my life because I stopped listening to myself, because I was not following my authentic self, my authentic truth. I was just a lost soul. And, you know, when I'm doing divination, when I'm reading for people, I see this across the table from me a lot, or across the screen, however that works. I see these people that know they're on the wrong path, but they're like, how can I force this to work? And the answer is
Oh,
usually you can't.
yeah.
You could choose to stay in this wrong place. That's your decision. It's your option. Or you can choose to follow your true calling, your true path. And that won't always be easy. It won't always be the simple way to go. It won't always be the comfortable way to go. I think that's part of it too. You know, it's like if you're in a wrong situation or you're in a job you hate, but the money is good, it's real hard to walk away from that, especially if you have responsibilities such as a home or a family. And that makes perfect sense. I mean, you have to be able to balance the mundane with the calling of your soul. You have to be able to balance your responsibilities. And I think that one of the best tools and the best things that divination can provide is the nudges and the hints that you need to get back on that path. And it won't always be an instant path change. It's not as easy as changing the trail at the park. Because, you know, it took you a while to get off your trail. You didn't just step off of it and suddenly you were in another dimension. You stepped off of it and kept going in the wrong way. And that's fine, you know, if that's what you want to do. But if you want to find your way back, you're going to have to forge through the middle sometimes. That's what it was been like for me. There wasn't a direct path back to my true authentic self. It was straight through the forest and it was bumpy. And I am so glad looking back that I did it.
Well, I think anybody who's had much exposure to tarot, to divination, to being helped by spiritual healers as well, is that it is within us, because it's an ego-based thing, to try and fight outcomes that aren't in alignment with what we desire and what we want.
Right.
And that is completely human nature, but that there is a lot of worth in the kind of peace, happiness, and resonance that you can gain in understanding. If I lean in on understanding the lessons about myself, because we can all be our own worst enemies. We've all done that. Like, let's
Oh,
circle
yes.
to goofy stuff we did when we were in college and the type of guys that I chose then. It's just not the best judgment that I was practicing. And it's having to recognize that the ways in which we contribute to the patterns in our lives that don't work out is
Right.
one of the things that you will be asked to examine on a self-empowerment journey. It's not just about, like, you know, accepting yourself as being on a resonant journey with the universe. It's about looking at yourself and saying, I love me regardless, but like, how am I getting in my own way here? What are the things I need to retool or fix or recalibrate to get better? And sometimes it can be about, like, hey, I'm not patient enough. Hey, I don't choose the best friendships. Hey, you have to be able to look at yourself from that detached perspective, not with shame or guilt, but rather with an eye towards, if I work on this, I can improve it and I can improve my outcomes. And instead of fighting outcomes, lean in on learning lessons, and then your outcomes improve. And it's just kind of
Agree.
that simple. At the
No, I
very
always tell
top
people one decision. You can make one decision at a time. And if you can make one decision in a new direction that's beneficial, that's a win. You've had a win for the day.
And breaking any form of pattern is one of the first ways to start things. And it can be as simple as like, I don't do the same thing in the morning every morning now. Like even changing, like if you have coffee normally, you drink a cup of tea one day a week or something to start kind of like breaking through that rut that we all get into. At the very top of this, before we turned on the recording, Rissa, you had referred to drinking some tea and like having tea leaves available. Is that something you're going to be able to do, or have I kept you talking so much you haven't been able to imbibe?
I've got it. Oh, wow. Look at that. There's a heart.
Yep, there's a heart on the, for people who are listening to this, on the side of the cup, there is something that's clearly in a heart shape. There's some loose tea leaves at the bottom of it. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're seeing in that? And I'm assuming it's a reading for self. It's hard to read for yourself. Like there is a role in going.
Oh, I had no intention as I drank this tea. It was just to demonstrate to you how I do it.
Gotcha.
So, the reality is that I haven't even turned this cup yet.
Okay.
This heart came out all by itself just to say hello and to send some love to you and your listeners, I'm sure. And that's actually quite unusual for something that distinct to stick before I've turned the cup. But the way I normally do this cup has the tea still in the bottom and about a tablespoon of liquid.
Okay.
And then I have the saucer, and I use a napkin in between
gotcha.
so that the porcelain doesn't scratch. Some people don't do that, but it just kind of goes right through my spine.
Respect for the tool, you know?
Yeah, I use all vintage porcelain cups for my readings, and the idea of scratching or cracking one is just not for me.
Yeah.
So I'm going to need a little bit of space to do this.
All right.
So basically, I'm holding the lid, well, the saucer on top of the cup. The napkin is in between to keep those scratches away. And this has to be kind of a big motion. So like a little tiny turn like this isn't going to get the tea on the sides of the cups. Like this is a weak effort, right? So you need a big effort like this. Like actually involve the shoulders to swish the tea.
She's acting like an agitating machine in a washing machine.
So, I always tell people to move it in whatever way resonates for them, whether they make a circle or a figure eight, or I've had people shake it up and down, or like a maraca, whatever. I know some tea leaf readers have specific rules. I don't. And I've also had people, querents, whose ability to move in certain ways was limited by their physical situation. So I don't limit the right or wrong way. Move it in the way that you can, that feels good. So once you feel like it's ready, I always say invert it quickly without stopping. So let's see what we have. Ooh.
Oh,
this
wow.
is the inside of the cup now.
Whoa. So the majority of the tea leaves have clung to the interior of the cup, almost ringing the very top of it. There are some forms and shapes down the sides of it. There's some on the paper towel or napkin that was used for straining as well. And it just like run me through a couple of the things that you see.
So I will tell you first, I don't do that this way, but some people read the saucer. That's much more common among coffee readers from the Middle East.
Yeah. Somebody asked me if I do that, and I'm like, not only do I not do that, I have absolutely no idea how anybody drinks coffee without the grounds being strained out already.
Yeah, it's strong. It's like the Turkish and the Syrian coffee. I'm not a coffee drinker. I've done it a few times just to understand it a little better. Right. It will sit you upright, to say the least. So the first thing I notice about the cup, I read the inside of the cup, and I mostly read tea leaves. I have occasionally read coffee grounds. It's not my preference. It just doesn't sing to me in the same way. So I always start right at the handle. The handle's where most people hold a teacup when they drink. Now in an Asian style cup, I would start from the bottom because you hold it underneath when there's no handle, right? Mm-hmm. But all of my cups in my sets, I start here, and I read this column underneath as the person as they're being represented right now, the way they are living in the world. Okay. So the first thing I notice is there is a little bit of a gap. And the gap would tell me that if I was reading this for someone, I would say you're really not putting yourself first. You're not emphasizing your own needs. You're probably taking care of others before yourself, which is why you aren't immediately showing up as yourself right at the top of the cup. Some people have nothing underneath their handle. It is definitely a thing I see. And my first reaction to that is, do you have knowledge of who you are or what you want in this world? Those are the people I mentioned before that I assume they're totally lost and they have no idea what they want, where they're going, or who they are. They've really lost sight of everything. And the next thing I see underneath here is a fish. There's a pretty big fish here. I don't know if you could see it on camera.
Yep, I can see that on camera. I can see the tail of it very, very easily.
Yeah. So seeing that I just turned this cup, it's really no surprise to see a fish. I am a Pisces. I am showing up as myself today. And underneath, there's just a lot of what I call scatter. So this cup has the scatter all throughout here. Right. That's the sort of tea leaves that don't take a shape. They kind of represent the things that you haven't defined, that you don't know what you want yet. And as I'm turning this cup, let's see, there's another heart. The heart did return, which is lovely. But this heart has moved. So the original heart was showing up underneath this side, which is what I read as the material side of the cup. It's about your material life, your work, your home, your car, your stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Or it could be education if you're still in school, like your classes. But it has switched, and now it is over here directly ahead of the handle, which is kind of like you're heading towards a future that you're going to love. You are heading on the right path if you keep making the right decisions. So I usually read a teacup to be about 4 to 6 months in time. Okay. Because there's so much detail in the cup that you can see in the drawings. There's so much that happens in these drawings that it's like 2 to 3 Celtic crosses together, like that kind of an information load. And I always tell folks, like, as you're looking at this drawing with all of the symbols from a cup like this, the important thing to remember is you're not going to live it out in a week. You're going to live it out over the course of the next few months. And some things aren't going to make sense yet because you haven't lived your way into them. Right. They are the path that you are on. And sometimes I get the question, and I'm sure you've heard this, what if there's something bad or challenging ahead of me? And I don't like to use the term bad because sometimes bad things come along, like, or as tower moments, for example, that you have to go live, you have to do them. You have to do them. You're not going to do them any other way. You're going to have to live through them in that way that they're coming because you weren't willing to change before. Right. And that's okay. Sometimes those are our best. We look back on them as our best moments, or at least I have, and many of the people around me have. Like, I can't believe I went through XYZ thing. It was so awful, but here I am on the other side, better, stronger, and more directed. So yes, things like that come up in teacups, just like they do in tarot readings or other kinds of readings. And my advice to people is always like, so you know it's coming. You've been informed. Yeah, exactly. How can you manage it? How can you manage it better? If it's about your house, if it's about your car, how can you preventatively take care of these things? You know, if it's about, the health of someone in your family, how can you preventatively take care of them or get ready for it in a way that you might not have if you didn't know it was coming? Right.
And that's something important to remember with readings as well, is that, like, we want these lives that are free from struggle, but it is part of being alive. It is part of the cost we pay for being a feeling being, is that you won't always just get to feel great. By the way, it would cease to have any meaning if you did. It would just be your neutral. It would be your normal. And that we will all have challenges, and that challenges are one of the ways that we learn about things that we're trying to improve. It's one of the ways that we can gain more respect for ourselves. The idea that losing something is another opportunity to appreciate what it was or what it wasn't is also in there. So don't wait, because I've had people who, because of some of the satanic panic, or there are actually readers who thrive on trying to scare people. I've had people who are literally afraid of me because of, and I have a very special deck that is the Everyday Witch deck that has a kitty on the outside of it that I always take. I don't really do parties any longer, but when I did parties, I would always take that one for the people who were naturally just like, I'm afraid you're going to tell me I'm going to die, or it's like, well, newsflash, everybody's going to die. Being born, dying, we all do it. Stuff that's in between that I really have a tendency to try and address. And I'm also not the bad news reader, but if there is that form within it look at it as an opportunity to, for instance, if you see that your company's financial future doesn't look as good as you would hope it would be one of the opportunities to retool your resume, to start looking around, stir up your network, to start looking for new opportunities, to maybe cut back on unnecessary spending, and just in case, so that you're better prepared. Being forewarned is being forearmed, and to not fear
Agree.
bad news, because if it's coming through in a reading, it's because your guides want you to know about it and they're trying to help you.
Absolutely. A lot of people ask me, I don't know why this question is so interesting to folks. Did you predict 2020? Of course not. I did not predict 2020. However, I can say that I'd say 4 months going into the pandemic, every single teacup had a squirrel in it. Every one. It didn't matter what socioeconomic or whether they were a student or a professional, everybody's cup had a squirrel. And in my teacup language, it means save your nuts and seeds, a rainy day is coming.
That's what it means. Some animal message decks too.
Yep. So literally every cup had the squirrel, and literally every single one of them was the posture was the same. They were all hoarding a pile of nuts. Everybody's cup, the same. So in a way, everybody was getting the same message that something is coming. It's not personal, it's global, and you're going to need to save your nuts and seeds for a rainy year, as it turned out. But yeah, so that definitely was a thing that I did see.
It was fate. Remember, in the tarot, major arcana are fateful forces at work in your life. And like, we can try and fight our fate, but fate is fate. And in my tarot readings, it showed up as the Tower and the Three of Swords over and over again, because I do a extended Celtic cross that has subconscious windows on it. I call it Gabriel's cross. I designed it. And every single person showed up with the Tower and the Three of Swords. And I would look at it and look at it and look at it, and I couldn't get any sense of what it was, other than it was something medical and it was something bad. And it's like, but you have a future, so it's not you. And that was, as far, I'd never seen a pandemic in cards before. So I knew something big was out there. And I think almost all readers did. But we want more answers than we're allowed sometimes when it comes to the fateful occurrences that help us confront who we are and what we're trying to do in this world. And that was a fate that was simply, something we had to face as a society to change some things. What the great thing that happened from the pandemic was people were trapped with themselves and they had to confront their own stuff and start working on it. So in the years that follow, people hopefully will look back to the time of lockdown in a way that it helped develop their personal growth, their connection to spirit, to examine the things in their life that weren't working. And it wasn't just about, my God, stockpile that TP. So, but that is one of the things that came out. And I think it's hilarious that you got a squirrel, because that is literally in one of my animal communication decks. It has a red squirrel. Gather your resources now, so they will sustain you through coming deprivation.
Oh, wow. I love that.
Yeah, you'd like the deck. I really think it's the animal messenger deck. I'll try and get the title to you later.
I would love to know that. Yeah.
Guys, we're running out of time here, so we're going to have to get running. Rissa, where can people find you?
You can find me at my website, teandsmoke.com. I'm also on Instagram and YouTube, and same name, Tea and Smoke, Rissa Miller.
Okay, awesome. And everything will be linked in the episode notes or in the description box down below. Guys, remember, encompass more forms of help and you will get more answers and more guidance on your own powerful path. And to try and approach divination is something that can give you predictive stuff, because that's kind of fun, but we can never prepare at the level that we think we're going to unless we have healed our inner world. And remember that tarot and divination is one of the things that can help you look into the closets of your mind to get them organized, to get them into the best shape, so you have the best energy to face the challenges that are just part of life. I'm Alane. You can find me at therisingmoon.com to book me for a tarot card reading or a life coaching session. You can find me at Cronecast at the Rising Moon on YouTube, and you can also find me here at Logical Magic Examining Esoterica. I have a Patreon to help you Monday through Friday if you want to join that. That's also linked in all of the other places as well. Thank you for joining me, and it's fun to turn an invigorating beverage into something that can show you a map of what you need to be looking at so that your journey through life is paved more smoothly through your own efforts and your own self-understanding. Hey, Rissa Miller, thank you so much for joining me. You've been a delight.